Hi everyone, this is Katie from Katie Loves Classic Books, and I'm here today with my August wrap-up. So, the first book I'll show you is one that I read a lot of in July as well, and a lot of in August because it was huge, and that is The Tale of Genji by the Japanese author Murasaki Shikibu. And this was thought to have been completed in the year 1008 or thereabouts. And this is widely considered to be the world's first novel, so that's really cool. And I'm so glad I read this beast of a book. It was not necessarily easy to get through, but I did find it interesting and enjoyable, and I took my time with it, and I think that was a good thing to do, to really appreciate it, because it is rather slow. Oh, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads, if you're wondering. So this mostly follows a prince named Genji, and then afterwards we follow him through his life, and then afterwards we follow some of his descendants as well. And this is pretty much just completely set at court at the time, and has to do with their everyday lives, a lot about relationships, a lot of their artistic and aesthetic pursuits, which makes up pretty much all of their pastimes, and also there's like a spiritual religious aspect of it, and that a lot of the characters face the pull between the material world and their attachments there, and the pull of the spiritual world and being free from their attachments that give them so much cause for suffering and kind of thinking of the next life. Kind of similar to a lot of religions at the time, to be honest. Yeah, so it was slow, but it was beautiful. Yeah, it was a lot of, I want to say there was a lot of repetition, but yet the story progresses, and you get, characters growing older in different stories, but yet it's a lot of the same kind of thing. And that goes on for 1,300 pages, so not everybody may find this fascinating. It takes a lot of willpower to get through, I guess. It's just one of those books, but I like reading things like this, that are old and just are so important in the history of literature and of the world, and I know they're going to be hard to get through, but I still find it fascinating. I'm really glad I read this, and it was pretty enjoyable, so it's good. Yeah, so I love just the appreciation of beauty in this book, which you can tell is just a big part of the society in Japan at the time, at court. Just they spend their days like playing music, writing poetry, practicing calligraphy, coming up with beautiful robe combinations, planning their gardens, appreciating their gardens, coming up with dances for certain festivals and stuff like that. And I just thought that was so cool. There was just such an appreciation of art and beauty at that time, and that's a cool part of their culture. And there's so much about relationships which were kind of crazy, and so the aristocratic court society in Japan at the time was pretty much polygamous. And it's interesting reading about a different relationship situation than the one, that I've grown up in and am accustomed to. Genji is rather amorous even in that society, and I feel like the author criticizes him a little bit. I mean, she puts him on a pedestal, but yeah, she criticizes him a little bit. Like he is faulted for being a little too amorous. But through all these relationships, we actually get so many different relationship situations that if you put aside the fact that this is polygamous, you can find a lot of different situations that are relatable within all these different dynamics. And I think that's one of the things Murasaki Shikibu did the best, was I think she was just very perceptive in how she related all these different relationships and people she was viewing. Is perhaps one of the greatest things about this book. And perhaps it was so groundbreaking at the time, at least in the format that she chose. Yeah, and it could be hard to keep track of the characters, but I feel like it wasn't too bad. But, you know, I did have to work a little bit to remember them. And then as far as the religious part is interesting, similar to, I feel like, Christianity at the time, there's such a focus on the afterlife, even though their beliefs are different about that. There's so much focus about the next life and wanting to make sure that life will be good. It's interesting. And yeah, like I said, there's such a pull between the material world and the spiritual world for them. And so many characters are struggling with this and wanting to renounce the world and become a nun or a monk, or not wanting to, struggling with it. And there were other like little beliefs thrown in there at the time that I don't think were Buddhist in nature. Like there were all these directional prohibitions, like they couldn't travel in certain directions on certain days, and that was interesting. There was a lot about spirit possessions, like exorcisms, and that I found really fascinating. Like I was always excited when that came up again because it was kind of bizarre. So people would get possessed by like spirits that had passed on, but also by living spirits. So like people who harbored like jealousy or resentment towards them would unconsciously like possess a person. I don't know, I thought that was like a really interesting concept. And that was just interesting to read about. What else? Yeah, I thought it was written very beautifully, like just the descriptions and the slowness of it and just the appreciation of the simple moments was lovely. Obviously, I'm reading a translation, which is always sad, you know, like I wish I could read every single language or something so that I could never miss out on the original quality of writing in a book. But that isn't so. So I had to read a translation, and I think this translation is a good one. You know, to be honest, I don't know how you can judge that unless you're like a scholar or something, but this was translated by Dennis Washburn. Yes. And I believe this is the most recent translation. I heard good things about it, hearing that the other English translations are like a bit outdated in this day and age. I don't know if that's true. But I liked this translation. It was interesting. I thought it was well done. So, yeah, I don't know if there's anything else I want to say about this. But I'm glad I read it. It was very, very interesting, and I just have so much appreciation for it, really. And I find it kind of sad that I really haven't heard very many people talk about this. Every time someone in, like, I've never heard anyone, like, on BookTube or anything talk about it, or, like, review it anywhere on the internet, to be honest. No one I follow anywhere has reviewed it. And then in real life, nobody's heard of it. Lots of people are like, oh, what are you reading? And then I'm like, oh, The Tale of Genji, like, assuming that they know what that is, and nobody really knows about it. And I think that's a shame, and so by sharing it here, I guess I'd like to change that in my small way, because I think this is important that people at least know about this, and if you're interested, it's good to read. It's a commitment, though. So if you're not up for it, that's okay. But it's good to know about because, you know, this is considered the world's first novel, and it's from Japan, and it was written by a woman. And I feel like we need to remember that to give Japan the credit. I think Japan is very proud, you know, that this work has come out of there. So to give Japan appreciation, you know, for the first novel having come out of that country, and to recognize that a woman wrote the first novel, like how cool is that? And I just think she must have been a really cool lady. And I get so nerdy about these types of things because I feel like when I read, I'm like connecting to the person who's writing it in a way. Because a book can exist, but it doesn't really come alive until it is read by somebody. And yeah, so there's this like magical kind of relationship between readers and writers. And so it's so cool reading old things and, you know, feeling connected to them in a way. And then it's just crazy to think about, like, that a girl like 1,010 years after this was written is still reading this, you know, in some country that didn't exist yet, like in a land that she probably didn't know existed. Like, that's crazy if you think about it. Like, how cool is that? And so, in a way, she is immortal through her writing, and I just like completely nerd out about the fact that I get to read it, and that in that way I get to connect with her and be transported to another place and time so different from my own. Yeah, so if you're up for it and you're a big reader and you're kind of nerdy like me, I do recommend this. Know that it is slow, but just give it the appreciation it's due, I guess. And now you know about it if you didn't know about it, so more people will know about the tale of Genji. So that's all I have to say about that. The book I read in August was Among Others by the Welsh author Jo Walton, and this was published in 2010, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. So I adored this book. This was just like a warm hug, and it was just such a pleasure to read, and I feel like the time that I was reading this, I really needed something like that, so it's really great. So this follows a Welsh girl named Mori, and she's growing up in the valleys of Wales, and this book is a light fantasy. So her mother is into some dark magic. She's like a witch or something, and she does something that kills Mori's twin and leaves Mori crippled. And then Mori runs away to her father and ends up going to boarding school. So that's pretty much the setup of the novel. Yeah, we don't really find out too much about the deal with her mom, and maybe I would have wanted more, but I think it still was pretty perfect. So I really enjoyed the light fantasy element. There was a big inclusion of fairies, which fit in perfectly with the Welsh landscape, you know, and a lot of their mythology and lore and beliefs of the past. And I love that. I love fairies, so I thought that was a really cool inclusion. Maybe not everyone would feel the same. And so that was really cool. And they were described differently, like not necessarily completely traditionally, which I liked. And there was just a lot about magic in here, and I feel like the magic that was described, almost the meaning behind it was almost trying to alert us of the magic that does exist in everyday life a bit. And so that was cool. A lot of the magic in here can be passed off as coincidence. And then just all this magic of these little things, like in objects, like in well-beloved objects. So there's a magic in there, like your grandma's favorite, I don't know, pot or something that she always cooks in, and how it's like partial to her and part of her like cooking magic is in it, and how there's magic in eating like natural food, how when you eat an apple it's connected to the whole apple tree. And I don't know, just there were discussions of all these types of things, and I really liked that. And then so there was that element of the book, the like light fantasy element, and then the other part of this book, which was so fabulous, was about books pretty much. And so it's this mostly coming of age story about Mori, but how she loves reading, loves books, and how she uses that to cope with the difficult situation she finds herself in, and just how much that means to her, and how much she learns from reading and finds her place in the world through that. And so for any reader, that was, you know, very relatable. And there was so much title dropping, which is so cool. And there were a good mix of genres, but mostly science fiction. So I like that there was a mix, but science fiction is something that I probably read like the least of, so I wasn't familiar with it. But that was kind of cool, because every time she mentioned something, and she would like mention stuff and discuss it, and just thought that was really cool and fun. And so I looked up pretty much a lot of the titles that she mentioned. It was just, even if I didn't want to read it, I did like put a few books on my to-read list that she mentioned. But even if I didn't want to read something, it was just still so fun to read all the little synopses that from the books that she mentions. Yeah, so I just really enjoyed that. It brought this whole other dimension to the book. Yeah, so this was just great fun and just had so many wonderful elements to it. It's written as if it's Mori's diary, and sometimes that's a device that I don't love, but I thought it really worked in this one. And I just loved Mori as a character because she's just so relatable. And for anyone who is a bookworm, who is quiet, who feels strange, I guess, different, they would relate to Mori. And yeah, the other characters, I don't know. Like I said, you don't find out enough about her sister and her mom. I feel like her growing relationship with her dad, I liked, but I was a little unsure about it. Like, there's so many good things, and they share the love of reading, and it ends as if they're going to grow closer together. But there was one incident, I won't spoil it, but there was one incident between them that was really not okay. And it was, like, never explained again, and then he was, like, made out to be relatively okay, and I don't know what the deal was with that. I almost feel like it was unnecessary because their relationship was okay besides that, so that was a little bit odd. So I liked him, I think. Not sure. But yeah, this is a wonderful book, and for people who love to read, and for those that, you know, used reading to cope growing up, and just because they loved it growing up, this is a book that I feel like you would relate to. If you do like science fiction, I mean, you don't even have to, but, you know, that's not something I really read, but I loved the inclusion of the titles in here. But if you love science fiction, you might really enjoy that element. And if you like fantasy and fairies, you might like the actual light fantasy element in this book. But yeah, this was just really wonderful, and I just loved it to pieces. The book that I read in August was The Talented Mr. Ripley by Patricia Highsmith, and this was published in 1955, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So this is a psychological thriller of sorts about a guy named Tom Ripley, and he lives in New York, and he's approached one day by this man named Mr. Greenleaf. And Tom kind of knows Mr. Greenleaf's son, Dickie. At least he's met him a few times. And Mr. Greenleaf is having trouble finding Dickie's friends, and so he finds Tom and asks Tom if he will go to Italy where Dickie is living to convince him to come home, and so he pays him to go do this. So Tom travels to Italy and befriends Dickie more and becomes very caught up in his life, and he envies Dickie's life so much and likes Dickie so much that he might even want to become him. So, and the story goes from there. I thought this was an interesting, possibly unique kind of psychological thriller because the consequences for crimes are not what you'd think they'd be. And the author manipulates you into rooting for the bad guy. Yeah, so this is pretty much a story about a kind of sociopath, I suppose, and it's from his point of view, so you get so sucked into him. I don't know, you don't ever want him to be found out for anything he does, which is crazy. Like, your rational mind is like, oh, that's not good, but like, it stresses you out to see him in a situation where he might get caught, which is fascinating and probably quite masterful of the author, you know, to make you feel that way. Yeah, and Tom Ripley is really just one of those really unique, fascinating characters. He's a master of impersonation. I mean, he's like the greatest actor of all time, just in real life, not on the stage. And he is a fantastic liar, to the point where it seems like he almost believes his own lies. Yeah, and his relationship to his own self and who he really is such a mystery, I guess. You can tell he's had a rough upbringing. His relationship to himself isn't that great. I feel like he dislikes himself. He dislikes his life. But it's hard to tell what there really is of himself. And he almost sees himself sometimes from the third person, which is strange. So he's a very strange, interesting character. And his sexuality is very interesting too. I know a lot of people say that he's homosexual, but I'm not sure if it's quite that straightforward. I think he does have homosexual tendencies, but it's hard to tell what the author meant exactly. I think he's confused at least. I read about Patricia Highsmith's life prior to reading this book. I like to read a little bit about an author's life before reading their books. I pretty much always do that if it's an author I haven't read anything from before. And it sounds like her sexual identity was just very confusing and she was very frustrated, and it just sounds sad, to be honest. And I wonder if she put that into Tom Ripley, so he is just as confused and frustrated as well. Or I also wonder, because he almost seems a little sexless. You know, he doesn't actually seem sexual at all. And so I wonder if she may have created a sexless character because she was so frustrated by her sexuality that she, you know, made a character that didn't have those kinds of motivations. But even the other characters think he's gay, and a lot of readers think he's gay, and that almost the character of Tom Ripley laughs at that. So I wonder, I don't know, maybe it's a mixture of all those things. It's the, you know, but I think whatever it is, it's a reflection of Patricia Highsmith's confused and frustrated state about her sexuality. So whatever it is, it's not quite straightforward, and you can't really find out what his deal is. Yeah, I don't know. And you end up feeling bad for him, I guess. Like I said, you kind of sympathize with him a little bit, even though you know what he's doing is wrong. And, Yeah, and the setting at first too, like on the Mediterranean and Italy, is so nice that like the life they paint that Dickie is living is so nice that I almost wish I had it too. So you can't blame Tom a little bit. For whatever reason, I like the first half better than the second half, even though I don't know if that makes sense. I've seen the film too, which is also excellent, a bit different. And I feel the same way about it. I don't know why, because Tom's talent comes more into play in the second half, so you think it'd be more interesting, but what, words. For whatever reason, the first half is just more interesting to me. Maybe the setup or something of what's really going to happen. Anyways, very interesting book, very interesting character, and I do recommend this if you're interested in that sort of thing. And Patricia Highsmith has a couple other things that I want to read, like Carol and Strangers on a Train. I've seen the films for both of those, and so, but I didn't know at the time that they were based on books. So I will have to read those at some point too, because she's an interesting author. The final book I read in August was Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, and this was published in 1996, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. So this is the second book in a fantasy trilogy called the Farseer trilogy, and that trilogy is part of like a greater series made up of a few trilogies called The Realm of the Elderlings. And I am loving this series so much already. This is only the second one, and I am so ridiculously in love with it. I can't even tell you. And this particular one was great. So this trilogy follows a guy named Fitz. He is a bastard of a prince, and these books are from his perspective, and we follow him. It's pretty much set where the royal family live, a place called Buckkeep. And in this one, there's a lot about there's a traitor amidst the royal family, and there's a lot of intrigue and whatnot there. And then also the kingdom of the Six Duchies, which is the kingdom he lives in, it keeps being attacked by these red ship raiders. And so those are the two like big problems. They showed up in book 1 too, but they really become addressed in this one. And that might not sound very interesting. Like, I feel like these books, if you just talk about the synopsis, don't sound that interesting, but they're so good. I don't even know what to tell you to explain how good they are. But I mean, I feel like I'm not even reading anymore. Like, I am just in it. Like, when I was reading this book, I'd pick it up and just like dive right in and be lost to the world for a while. It's so vivid, and it's a world you want to live in and find out what happens. And but they're well written. The plot of this one was so fascinating, but it's perfectly paced. You are always hooked. Like, you always want to know what's going to happen with everybody, yet it's not like so fast and so caught up in like mindless action that it isn't good writing and it isn't quality anymore. And I think that strikes the perfect balance for me. Like, the pacing and everything that happens is just absolutely perfect. I'm not even kidding. At least in my world. And the characters are just so wonderful. The characters in this book are some of the best I've read about. Their relationships to each other and their development, absolutely fantastic. And and I got to see some of the more emerging themes of this story in this one, so that's cool. Like the bonds that people share with other people and with animals, and how important it is to be yourself even when you think that your gifts aren't good, that utilizing them and working with what you're given is the way to go, and how each single person can affect the fate of the world, because it all adds up. And also I feel like there's a lot of commentary on the right kind of leadership, and I feel like that will grow as well. So just some wonderful themes. I feel like in the first book it was setting up the world, and it was kind of a coming of age for Fitz, and now in this one the themes were emerging and the plot thickens, and it was just fantastic. The world this is set in is kind of your typical medieval high fantasy world, but it's great. And the magic system is subtle, but it grew in this one, and I really like just all the different things that are going on in Fitz's gifts. And Fitz is such a wonderful character. I love reading from his perspective. I could read thousands of, maybe not thousands of books, a lot of books by his perspective, and I wouldn't get tired of it, although I know that the other series aren't necessarily from his point of view. But I really enjoy him, and I just enjoy so many of the characters, and just my heart belongs to so many of them, and their relationships with Fitz are just wonderful. This mostly just continued with characters we already were introduced to, but there were a few. The one that had the most impact was a wolf called Night Eye, and I loved the inclusion of him. So cool. Yeah, so I just adored this, and I'm trying to read one book in this series a month, and so far I've been successful. So yeah, so I want to read them at a good pace, but not too quickly, so that I read other things as well, because I really could just end up reading all of these in one go, because I'm addicted, but in a good way. And I think Robin Hobb is fantastic. Yeah, and this one was pretty long. The first book was not long, but this was like around 600 pages. But I still flew through it, and I think the next one is even longer. It's like 900 pages or something, but I don't care, because I want to live in this world, and I have such trouble letting it go. Yeah, so if you like fantasy and you have not read Robin Hobb, what are you doing with your life? Go pick up the Farseer trilogy. If you don't like fantasy, I think this is a great introduction too. I do like fantasy, but I really have not read much of it, to be honest. I'm like growing my, I don't know what you'd call it. I'm just reading more fantasy, and enjoying it. And these are fantastic. I don't know how anything could beat Robin Hobb, to be honest. So yeah, so that's enough of Robin Hobb. Those are all the books I read in August. And because of the Tale of Genji, I didn't read too much, I feel like, in July or August, but hopefully I'll read more now. If you liked this video, and if you've read any of these books or want to recommend something to me, please feel free to comment. I will link my Tumblr and my Goodreads below, because I share written reviews for every book I read on there, and some other random stuff on Tumblr, like quotes and whatnot. And I also have a Patreon account if you feel like supporting me and my channel. So thank you all, and I shall see you next month. Bye.